our parents went out on New Year's Eve together. We got in trouble together.
At 61, Melissa Gilbert has finally decided to break the silence. For decades, she carried the memories quietly, the admiration, the confusion, the fear, and the awe, all tied to one woman, Patty Duke, the child star turned Hollywood legend, whose brilliance lit up the screen while her private life spiraled into chaos. Melissa grew up watching her, learning from her, and later, trying not to become her. But time has a way of revealing truths we're not ready to face. And now, after years of reflection and a lifetime of lessons, Melissa is telling the story she once kept locked away. A story of talent and trauma, devotion and damage, the kind of relationship that shapes a young actress long before she understands what she's witnessing. And the truth she reveals about Patty Duke's influence on her life is far more haunting and far more human than anyone ever imagined. Before Melissa ever understood Patty Duke, she understood the spotlight. Raised in the fast lane of Hollywood, Melissa was just 9 years old when Little House on the Prairie made her a household name. Cameras, interviews, adults making decisions for her, it all felt normal, because it was all she had ever known. But fame at that age is never gentle. It molds you, pressures you, and whispers that perfection is the only way to survive. In many ways, Melissa's childhood mirrored Patty Duke's own rise to stardom. The early success, the public adoration, and the quiet loneliness hiding behind the applause. She didn't know it then, but she was walking the same path, one paved with expectations, sacrifice, and a kind of emotional weight no child should carry. And it was that shared foundation that made their fateful meeting years later far more powerful and far more dangerous than Melissa expected. Patty Duke was the kind of legend you felt before you even met her. By the time Melissa Gilbert stepped onto the set of The Miracle Worker, Patty wasn't just a star, she was a force. The industry adored her brilliance, whispered about her volatility, and bowed to the power of her performances. To young Melissa, she was both mesmerizing and intimidating. A woman who carried pain in her eyes and genius in every movement. But what struck Melissa most wasn't the fame, it was the fragility beneath it. Patty could be warm one moment and distant the next, sharp as lightning, then soft as rain. It was the first time Melissa saw how greatness could coexist with chaos, how a person could be applauded by millions, yet still be fighting battles no one else could see. She didn't realize it then, but this intense energy would pull her into a relationship far more complicated than mentor and student. Their collaboration on The Miracle Worker was the moment everything shifted. Melissa stepped into the role of Helen Keller with innocence and discipline, but Patty Duke, playing Anne Sullivan, brought a ferocity that shook everyone on set. Her intensity was real, raw, and sometimes frightening. She pushed Melissa in ways no one else ever had, demanding truth in every gesture, every scream, every moment of silence. For a young actress still learning who she was, it felt like standing in the eye of a storm. But beneath that storm was something else, entirely a woman fighting her own demons. Patty wasn't just directing the scene. She was reliving parts of herself Melissa didn't yet understand. And in that emotional collision, Melissa absorbed more than technique. She absorbed the weight of a life lived too fast and too hard. What she didn't know then was that this experience would become the mirror she'd one day see herself in. It wasn't until Melissa grew older that the pieces finally clicked. As a child on set, she saw Patty Duke's mood swings, her exhaustion, her bursts of brilliance, but she didn't yet understand the reason behind them. Years later, when Melissa learned about Patty's bipolar disorder, and the trauma she carried from her abusive childhood managers, everything shifted into heartbreaking clarity. Patty wasn't unpredictable because she was difficult. She was unpredictable because she was wounded. And suddenly, all those moments Melissa once interpreted as intensity or temper became signs of a woman fighting battles no one else could see. The lessons Patty taught her, the raw honesty, the emotional fearlessness, came from a place of survival, not arrogance. For Melissa, it was like rereading a chapter of her life with brand new eyes. And what she discovered next was even more unsettling. She realized she was beginning to repeat some of Patty's patterns herself. The realization hit her slowly, and then all at once. As Melissa entered her 20s and 30s, the pressures of fame began carving into her life the same way they had carved into Patty Duke's. The perfectionism, the anxiety, the desperate need to please everyone, it all felt eerily familiar. She found herself slipping into unhealthy habits, pushing through emotional exhaustion, and hiding her struggles behind the polished image Hollywood expected. In quiet moments, she saw Patty in herself. The overwork, the emotional swings, the fear of disappointing others. It frightened her. Patty had been a warning, yet Melissa realized she was walking dangerously close to the same edge. It was then she understood what Patty had never been able to say out loud, that surviving Hollywood sometimes means losing parts of yourself along the way. But Melissa's turning point wasn't just recognition. It came with the person who helped her finally step back from the brink, someone who changed the course of her life entirely. Her turning point arrived disguised as stability. As Melissa stepped deeper into adulthood, she met people who grounded her: mentors, friends, and eventually partners who offered something she hadn't felt since childhood, a sense of safety. But even then, the shadows of fame lingered. Her first marriage faltered under the weight of her unspoken struggles. Her second brought temporary calm, but not clarity. It wasn't until she confronted her own addictions, her emotional burnout, and the unresolved wounds from her early fame that she began to understand what true healing required. In those years of untangling her past, Melissa found strength in honesty, something Patty Duke had fought for her entire life. And the more Melissa embraced the truth, the more she saw Patty not as a haunting reflection, but as a roadmap of what happens when pain goes untreated. What Melissa discovered next, however, was the piece that tied everything together, a revelation about Patty Duke that she had never dared say publicly. The truth Melissa had been circling around was simple and devastating. Patty Duke wasn't just a mentor, a co-star, or a cautionary tale. She was a mirror, a reflection of everything Melissa feared she might become if she didn't break the cycle: the emotional chaos, the self-doubt, the need to be perfect for an industry that rarely returned the kindness. But beyond the fear was something deeper: compassion. Melissa realized that Patty's brilliance and her breakdowns came from the same place: a heart that had been pushed too hard, too young, for too long. Patty survived the only way she knew how, and Melissa finally understood that the woman she once viewed as unpredictable was actually unbearably human. And as Melissa stepped into her 60s, she found the courage to say what she had never said aloud: that Patty Duke, in all her flaws and fire, had shaped her more than anyone else. But there was still one final question Melissa needed to answer, a question that would define Patty's legacy and her own. The question that haunted Melissa the longest was painfully simple. Was Patty Duke someone she needed to escape, or someone she was meant to understand? For years, Melissa feared the answer. She worried that acknowledging Patty's influence meant acknowledging her own vulnerabilities, the parts of herself she tried hardest to hide from Hollywood, from her family, and even from her own reflection. But as she aged, something shifted. Instead of running from the parallels between their lives, she began to study them. She saw Patty not as a warning, but as a woman who had walked through fire without the tools to heal. And in that realization, Melissa found her own freedom. She could take the lessons without inheriting the pain. She could honor Patty without repeating her path. But this clarity led Melissa to the final and most important truth, a truth about forgiveness, legacy, and the one thing Patty Duke never received, but desperately deserved. In the end, Melissa realized that Patty Duke's legacy wasn't fame, it was survival. For years, Hollywood celebrated Patty's awards, her iconic roles, her brilliance on screen. But almost no one honored the battles she fought behind the scenes, the untreated mental illness, the manipulation she endured as a child star, the decades she spent rebuilding herself piece by fragile piece. And so, Melissa decided to say what the industry never did, that Patty Duke deserved grace, compassion, and forgiveness, long before she ever received any of them. Melissa understood now that telling the truth wasn't exposing Patty, it was honoring her. By speaking openly, she offered Patty the dignity she had been denied in life, and offered herself the closure she had never known how to seek. But Melissa's journey didn't end with acknowledging Patty's pain, because the final chapter of her story is about something even deeper: how Patty Duke helped her redefine her own identity,